Thank you for calling the ASMR Help Desk. How may I help you today? You have reached our book review line, and tonight we will be reviewing 2 books. The first is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. American Gods is a book that was first released in June of 2001. It has received the Hugo Award for Best Novel, the Locus Award for Best Fantasy Novel, and the Nebula Award for Best Novel, all in 2002. The novel is set in the United States and revolves around the story of Shadow, who is an ex-convict that, right before he is released from prison, his wife is killed in a car accident. And soon after he is released, he meets a character named Mr. Wednesday. And Wednesday hires him as a bodyguard assistant type. And they travel across America. It is a winding novel, and I mean that in a good way, in that often there are portions of it that when I'm reminded of that portion of the book, it is almost like it's almost a surprise to realize that it is in the same story as the other portions. Almost as if the book is a series of short stories that have a common thread or multiple common threads that connect it all together. For example, there is a portion of the story where Shadow has to go to a funeral parlor in Cairo, Illinois, and spend some time with a couple of characters there. And it's a very short portion of the book. It is integral to the plot, but it seems like it's almost out of place, but not in a bad way. It sticks with you. It's a portion of the story that in some ways doesn't seem to fit with the others, but yet it does. Another example is Shadow has to go and spend a significant amount of time in the community of Lakeside in Wisconsin, and a murder mystery begins to unfold, and Shadow is in the middle of it. And then we leave Lakeside, and again it's like another piece of the puzzle that doesn't seem to fit, but miraculously it does. It's a fascinating book, and as a fan of theology and the study of the world cultures and religions, it was a joy to read. If you are at all interested in any of those things, this book is an excellent choice. In the 10th anniversary edition, there is also included short stories that are put in between the chapters that tell of believers of particular gods throughout history. And those are fascinating to read. Personally, I listened to the audiobook, and I was sure to get the the 10-year anniversary version, and those short stories were all read by Neil Gaiman. And they were intriguing and fascinating, and sometimes horrifying. And almost every one of them, stick with you in a different way. It is fascinating how Gaiman was able to use myths and stories from religion, all religions, and weave them into this tale in various ways, or reference them in various ways. It almost becomes a bit of a game if you are interested in world religions, in trying to pick out which character is whom. And when a certain character refers to something, what does it mean? I highly recommend it. Now that is my spoiler-free portion of the review. I will now be getting into spoilers, so if you have not read the book, go ahead and skip to the timestamp that is now on the screen to begin the spoiler-free version of our next book. But right now, I'm going into the spoiler section of my review of American Gods. Personally, I enjoyed trying to pick out which god was which as I read the story. I'll admit, it took me longer than it should have to pick out that Wednesday was Odin. But the whole concept of gods being worshipped in new lands created new versions of those gods, and their power was directly proportional to how strongly the worship was fascinating. I've seen a concept in other forms of media, and I must be honest, I don't know if those other places I've seen this concept came before American Gods or after. But I think it's a fascinating way to present religion and gods. I also found it interesting that there is a European Odin and an American Odin, and a European Jesus and an American Jesus. I also like how Gaiman brought in the new gods, essentially the internet and technology, among other things, to create a rift within the worlds of gods and goddesses. I also really enjoyed how he was able to weave among these sometimes ancient stories of Egyptian gods and Norse mythology. He was able to weave this strong feeling of Americana through the entire piece, where you truly felt like these characters were driving along the road in the Midwest, stopping to see roadside tourist traps and staying in rundown motels. As someone who has personally done that for both work and pleasure, it truly caught the feeling of driving across America. In the preface to the version that I read, Gaiman explains that he had done a road trip across America, and that is where he was able to pull that feeling, that true feeling, that he was able to weave within the story. And I loved it. Okay, final warning, I'm going to spoil 2 really big reveals, and I want to give you a chance to jump out before you get there. The character of Loki, Loki Lysmith, I will admit, because I was listening to the version I was listening to, which had a whole cast of actors playing the roles, the way the character's name, Loki, was said in such a way that I couldn't think of anything but Lowkey, like he's Loki Lysmith. But seeing it written and hearing it said again, Loki, it's quite interesting that one of Shadow's compatriots within the prison had a name very similar to the son of Odin. And the real spoiler, that is actually something that isn't directly said in the novel, but is heavily implied. And that's the fact that Shadow is a nickname, and it's said as such early on. His name is Shadow Moon. His last name is Moon, but his first name is never truly given. Shadow's real name is Balder, another son of Odin. Now it is revealed in the story that he is a son of Odin, but it is never specifically said that he is Balder. And it makes sense if you know the story of Balder and you think back on the story. Because even when Shadow's wife is killed and he's trying to process that, he's numb. He doesn't really feel much. And that was one of Balder's powers, is he couldn't feel pain. Now I'm sure in the book I may be misremembering and that there were parts where he did get angry or did feel hurt, but at least through the early parts of the book, I remember being struck with how much he loved his wife Laura, and how he would get angry. But he mentioned, and I specifically remember him saying, he felt numb. So a little nod to that. So, the ASMR Help Desk gives American Gods 5 stars. Now, on to our second book. We're sticking with a bit of a theme. And the next book is Good Omens. The full title is Good Omens, The Nice and Accurate Prophecies of Agnes Nutter, Witch. It was first released in 1990, and it was written by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. Essentially, as they tell it, Gaiman started working on a novel, and he sent it to Pratchett to read, and then Pratchett sent it back with some more included, and then they just continued to collaborate back and forth until they had the book. And I read this book right after I finished reading American Gods because I wanted to continue in the same kind of literary space. I wanted to continue reading within that same world. But I needed something lighter, something a little bit more funny, I guess. And this book absolutely delivered. While it plays in a similar space, speaking of gods and the supernatural, it is much more narrow in that it mostly sticks within the Judeo-Christian mythology. And it plays along in that space where gods and devils are real and angels and demons exist. But they exist in a very different and arguably more practical way. Almost like if you think of, I'll use a very prevalent example in recent weeks, and that is if you are watching the television show Loki, there is a organization called the Time Variance Authority, and they essentially handle all time variance to maintain the quote-unquote sacred timeline. But it's run very much like the DMV from the 1960s. And that's kind of the way the demons and the angels worked, except the demons worked more like the mafia, and angels worked more like a bureaucracy. And it revolves around two characters. Well, it actually revolves around a couple of different groups. It revolves around Aziraphale, an angel, and Crowley, a demon. And it is essentially about how they live on Earth together, and they quite like their little corners of the universe that they've carved out for themselves on the planet. But the powers that be, both within heaven and hell, have decided that the apocalypse is due to come. And they task Crowley to kick it off by having the Antichrist delivered. So the Antichrist can essentially take over the world and start the apocalypse. Essentially kickstart the Book of Revelations. And he tasks Aziraphale to help him maybe throw a monkey wrench into it. This also leads to following a small group of children called the Them, including, it's essentially for kids who go on adventures. Little do they know that one of them was supposed to be the Antichrist. And then it also follows the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, as well as following a witch, Anathema Device, who is also trying to prevent the apocalypse that was predicted by her ancestor, Agnes Nutter. It's a fascinating and delightful book. All of the different sections of the novel, whether you're following Crowley and Aziraphale, or the Them, or the Horsemen as they come together, unlike American Gods, they all fit beautifully. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. In American Gods, all the puzzle pieces fit beautifully, but they didn't seem like they would fit initially. And even looking at them individually, they seem like they're odd compared to the rest of the puzzle. But with Good Omens, all of the pieces, even when viewed absent of anything else, seem like they should fit. And it's just so amusing. It's just a book that I really enjoy. And it was a great follow-up to American Gods, because American Gods is very heavy, and this book is much lighter. I don't even want to go into a spoiler section on this book because it's so good. It also has one of my favorite characters. Who has one of my favorite characters, Shadwell. Who has one of my favorite insults ever. You great southern piker. I don't even know what that means, but I love using it. So, Good Omens, the ASMR help desk gives 5 stars. We're a very positive group around here. Well, that about wraps up our review section. If you have any suggestions about any books you would like to have reviewed, please let us know, and we'll try to see if we can fit some time in to check them out and give a review. Thank you so much for calling, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. This show is part of the CIP network, where we inspire creativity one episode at a time.